let's talk a little bit about the SEC championship game. Wild that it ended up in overtime, which obviously we'll get there, but it's so interesting. You never really want to play a team twice, right? And I think if you do play them twice, you're almost in a better position if you're the team that lost the first time, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have it's just so hard to repeat, like, or to like you said, to win the second time. But if you're playing a team a second time, you'd probably prefer them not to be Georgia, right? Like, and so, if you're going to play a team, if you're going to have to be a team that has to, but even like, you think about Georgia and Alabama and a lot of their rematches, like that hasn't gone the way that the team wins the first time. Like Georgia wins the SEC championship, but then loses in the Natty. And then same thing in reverse, right? Georgia wins the SEC, or, Bama wins the SEC, Georgia wins the Natty. And so I do think that there is something there with that matchup specifically. But then outside of that, I mean, yeah, really tough task for Texas. I thought it was weird that Texas was favored. Like I don't want to say that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, but like I bet on Georgia. Like I just thought that it was more likely that Georgia wins than Texas. Now it took a really weird route to get there. And, certainly didn't feel great about that at halftime because of how the game was going. But yeah, I thought it was strange that Georgia wasn't the favorite, and getting them at plus money to me actually felt great. And I was like, yeah, Kirby is an underdog. Like, let's go.
Well, yeah, and that is the weird thing. Like the games on the field have to matter. Georgia not only beat Texas, but handily beat Texas. And I do think if you look at Kirby and Sark, and this is probably being nitpicky, but I think Kirby's a better coach than Sark. And that doesn't mean that Sark's not a good coach. But with Saban out, I think I take Kirby over pretty much anybody, right? And I don't know. Certainly when he has a chip on his shoulder, which it seemed like he has had this year, and we'll get to some of his snarky comments after the game later on as well. But Texas was pretty dominant the first half of this ball game, though.
Yeah, I thought Texas was playing much better. However, they just didn't put Georgia away. Yeah. And that was, to me, that was the big takeaway of the first half, is especially now hindsight's 2020, and we didn't know that Carson was going to get hurt. But if they had converted more in the red zone and they had put Georgia away like they should have, if they'd have gone to the half like 13-3 and the backup was in, like they're winning that game. Like I don't think Georgia could have done enough. Now, obviously, football still has to be played, and certainly Georgia is a capable team of coming back. They did it against Tennessee. They did it against Alabama, even though they lost that. But I thought that the game was decided when Texas got into the red zone several times and missed field goals, had penalties, took sacks, had to settle for field goals. When they went to the half with only 6 points, and when Beck got hurt, you were like, well, they still have a great chance because Beck's not there. But when they went to the half with only 6 points, I mean, I was texting buddies and tweeting like, Georgia's winning this game. Like, there's no chance that when you don't put Georgia away, that they're not going to come back and win. And that's exactly what happened. So to me, Texas's wide receivers were outplaying Georgia's DBs. I thought that Texas was running the ball decently. They didn't do that well in the second half, but Texas was dominating the game and went to the half up 6-3. And that's just a recipe for Kirby to beat you.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is that I don't know. And again, I think Kirby Smart's a really great coach, but I don't know that there is a better halftime adjuster than Kirby Smart. And I think, we saw that and you mentioned that Alabama game, and they did end up losing it, but it was the tale of two halves, right? Had that team that showed up in the second half, played like they had played that well in the first, they would have blown the doors off of Alabama. I think Kirby Smart makes adjustments better than almost anybody. And something that I think, Gator fans might actually be able to relate to here is that, Sark calls the plays, right? I think that makes it incredibly difficult when your head coach is your OC to make adjustments at halftime, because his biggest job as a head coach is addressing the entire team, right? You're firing them up. You're telling them you got 30 more minutes to play. You're telling them you're this close. You're on the threshold. And maybe that doesn't leave you enough time for the kind of adjustments that are necessary to beat Georgia for two halves.
Yeah. And I mean, you also just mentioned like Kirby being a better coach than Sark. Yeah. And I think the aggressiveness that Kirby plays with is a big deal. And I'm sorry, coaches with, probably did, back when he was playing too, but I do think that that's a big deal too. And again, Kirby can CEO it a little bit more. And same, both of our coaches calling plays. What does that take away from their just overall operation, their overall, and in game and then out of game, right? Roster management, NIL, and recruiting your own roster to come back in the portal and everything else. Like having to take the time of offensive install. It's not just in the games. I mean, it's big picture too, and why most coaches are going away from it. I think there's a pretty good chance that both of our coaches, for the teams that we cheer for, probably go away from it for the 2025 year. And it'll be interesting to see if Sark does or not. But I also thought, as big as I thought Texas not putting Georgia away, I almost think that, did it feel to you like Texas was playing not to lose and Georgia was playing more to go out and get it? Because when the first drive of the second half, Georgia goes down with the backup and scores a touchdown. To me, I thought Texas was almost like shell shocked there. No, I mean, one touchdown, right? Like it was the difference in the game, but like one touchdown, like didn't decide the game right there. But I thought Texas just kind of thought like, okay, well now Beck's out. We'll be fine. We'll conservative our way to this win. And Georgia was the team that went out and took it. I thought that they played.
Absolutely. They went out and took it.
Yeah. They played more aggressively. And I almost feel like they caught Texas on their heels, almost caught them, I don't know. Just they didn't seem like the more aggressive team, and I mean they should have been. They were the ones playing without the backup. They were the ones playing with
because Texas knows better than anybody how good a number 2 quarterback can be, right? With Arch Manning sitting there, so the fact that I don't know if they expected there to be a massive drop off, but like Georgia recruits just as well as Texas recruits at pretty much every position. So if you'd be okay if your backup was in there, you should make the assumption that Georgia's going to be okay too. And it's like that. It is like they were kind of surprised that there wasn't a massive drop off. And kudos to Kirby for continuing to be aggressive even when Beck got hurt. I think that shows a lot of confidence in your team, right? If your offensive leader can go down and you don't skip a beat, you don't call plays differently, you run your offense. I think that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, again, I just think it was more ballsy by Kirby. Like even the interception that Gunner threw, like Georgia was somewhat fortunate that didn't go back for a pick six. They got the tackle, but there was nothing but green grass in front of that guy. And Texas probably wins if that happens, right? But they didn't. You might even say like, I don't know that you needed to be that aggressive, Kirby. Like just run the ball and take your field goal. But I think that even just in that, it felt like Texas was just kind of, Georgia was going for it and Texas was very much like dancing around it. I thought that, Texas drove down at the very end of the game and they did end up forcing overtime, but it felt like they were playing for overtime. It felt like their calls weren't very aggressive. They, running screen passes and the double reverse or the double fake, like the fake screen to this side, the fake screen to this side. And then he's looking out like against Georgia's D line. You just don't have time to do that kind of stuff. And instead of being tricky, like the slants were open all night for Texas. Like, why didn't you just continue to attack the Georgia defense where you were beating them? It felt like they got too cute. And then in overtime, I thought they did the same thing. They had they got inside the 15-yard line and they started throwing fade routes to the back of the end zone. And I'm just like, well, this seems dumb.
Cost them in overtime. But do you think that there's any world where this game meant less to Sark because they were going to the playoffs either way?
I think you wanted to win it. I think it actually meant more to.
It would be huge for Texas to come into this conference year one and win it. I think that would be a massive statement for Texas. But I think Kirby knows what it means to win this conference, and it's incredibly important to him as well. But it just, I was sitting there thinking, I wonder if, only the winner advanced, if Texas would have had a different game plan.
Well, yeah, maybe. But I think that because of the way that the format is set up now, there is less to lose, right? Like okay, well now Texas has to host a home playoff.
Which is
the 5 seed is still really attractive. And if both these teams win, like they're going to play each other anyway. And so I think that, it's not but to me, like this game should have meant more to Texas.
Yeah.
because of what you could have gained. Like everybody, Georgia's the team that just had to go to 8 overtimes with their rival, and Texas is the newcomer. And hey, we're planting our flag here, in the SEC, and we're here year one and did this. And it almost felt like they were aggressive in the first half. Now they didn't convert well; their execution was bad. But it almost felt like when Beck went out, they kind of took a foot off the pedal somewhat, because I felt like they thought they could. Well, we're definitely going to beat the backup now, and they just didn't have that same aggressiveness.
You just have
And
to make mistakes or something.
yeah, like it just, hey, they're going to give us a few. Let's be conservative, and that's where they really should have put the pedal to the metal, because in that moment you lost to a backup at that point, right? Like the loss, if you'd have just lost to Beck because they were better than you, that's one thing.
Right.
Now they still got the 5 seed, so it's not like, I mean, how much did it really cost them? They got to play an extra game now, but you certainly had a chance though to go out and beat a backup and get I mean, they'd have been certainly, they'd have been the 2 seed, and Georgia probably would have been 5. But yeah, I thought that, well, no, Georgia probably wouldn't have been at that point, but yeah, I mean, it felt like, again, I thought Georgia was the more physical team, and they were the team that played to win, even with the backup, kind of odds against them. And but no, it should have meant more to Texas. Like, I mean, UGA was playing with a backup. Like nobody would have blamed UGA if they lost the game once Beck went out. They just said like, oh, that stinks. Hopefully he's back for the playoff. Like we get it. You lost a game with your backup. He'll be back for the playoff. But nobody's going to hold it against you to lose to a good Texas team with your backup. But yeah, so like once that happened, certainly this game should have meant more to Texas.
Well, Georgia obviously winning 22-19, but that overtime, first time that has ever happened in an SEC championship game. So we got to see a little bit of history in the making on Saturday. And I always like free football, right? I'm always here for the free football. But, Beck, I think, has had an interesting season. I just even look at the 2 halves of the Florida game. He made so many mistakes and was able to kind of come back from that and play better. And we saw that in the game against Alabama. Like I think you and I were talking during that game, like there's the deer in the headlights look that first half. And they surge the second half. They almost win. They look like a completely separate team. Is Beck, is there really as much a drop off as people think?
To me, Georgia's biggest problems are, it's really the talent out at wide receiver. Their weapons just aren't as good.
They lost a lot of guys to the league.
They lost so much. And so to me, there's it doesn't surprise anybody that there's like a slight regression, but to me, it's more of a confidence thing. And talking with people around Georgia, it's the fact that he knew he could throw it up to those weapons and not only do they lose guys to the NFL, you think about the tight ends and stuff, they've got guys that are in trouble with the law. They've got guys that are injured. Like there's a lot of talent that's not out there at wide receiver. They lead the country in drops. And you saw several drops again last night where that Georgia just cannot figure that out. And so I think it makes Beck play almost in this mindset of like, I've got to be perfect because these guys are going to, even when I'm putting it on them, they're dropping it. And I don't have the talent that I had last year. So I do think Beck has regressed some, but I think most of it comes down to the talent they've lost and just his mindset of like, well, if I'm not perfect, we ain't winning this game. The running game too, like Frazier's has struggled with fumbles. Etienne's been banged up at times during the year. And so, yeah, they're just not as good. I mean, ultimately they've still got a really good defense, but they're not as dominant defensively. Their weapons are down, they're just not as prolific of a team as they've been for the last 2 or 3 years. And so I do think that that's a big deal too.
Yeah. We talked about how play calling in overtime for Texas, we didn't think it was that good. And then Georgia, Etienne has his moment where he scores and, I'm sure that sticks in the craw of Gator fans and kind of he told us he wanted to go somewhere where he could win championships. And that's exactly kind of how it played out for him. I don't think his stats this season are how we saw it play out or, some of the injuries that he's had, but he got that moment that he said, he was looking for.
Yeah. And I mean, I get it. Right. And there's certainly, UF fans, I mean, anytime a player goes to a rival, especially, and we really haven't even seen it like this level of it. This is a different kind of level. I've seen it in basketball a little bit, but nothing like this, where it's one of the biggest, a top 5 rivalry in all of college football, and you've got a guy leaving one to go to the other, and looking at where both programs are. And Florida obviously had a nice end of the season, but at the end of the day, like Etienne had 2 sub 500 years at UF, and now is an SEC champion, number 2 overall seed. Like, yeah, I couldn't, from a program, again, injuries and production aside, from a program perspective, like, yeah, this is exactly what he wanted, and he got it. And it's, it's damning for UF because they have to erase that narrative, right? Like they have to somehow close that gap and start to get that back because, I don't think there's going to be some mass exodus or anything, but like, what does that do for other kids around the country? Not just at UF, but just anywhere. Like if you're at Florida State right now, or you're at Michigan or Ohio State or Michigan or wherever, are you not looking at Oregon saying like, man, I'd like to be there? Or are you not looking at Clemson saying, man, I'd like to be there? So what does it do for other programs too, to say like, because it is just so easy to jump ship, but UF, kind of bias aside or fandom aside, I did think it was kind of a cool moment because he had been through so much this year. He'd been through so much while he was at UF. It was cool that he was the one to end it. And in a really strong, just effort. Like I said, Georgia wanted the game more, and they certainly were the more physical team. And that run was, again, very physical against a very good Texas front where they powered their way in. And I thought it was a microcosm of really Georgia's season of just like willing their way to not only wins, but an SEC championship. So again, a cool moment. If you're a UF fan, yeah, certainly not your favorite thing to see.
Going to be interested to see how this plays out kind of over the long term. And I will tell you, as a Gator fan, I don't think we missed Etienne this year. Florida had a really deep running back room. I think Jaden Baugh kind of rose to the surface there. Webb before he was hurt. Obviously, Montrell, when he was healthy, had a good season. Jacoby Jackson was really well. Ran really well this season. If there was going to be a room where we lost somebody who's considered a superstar, I think this was the only room that could have happened, and they're not really skipped much of a beat. But what I'm interested to see long-term is how the NFL views this. Anybody that has gone through the draft process will tell you that most teams will talk to everybody in your life to figure out about you. They're going to talk to your kindergarten teacher. So if they're going to talk to your kindergarten teacher about the kind of person you are, they sure as hell are going to contact your old coach about the kind of person that you are. And so I'm interested to see, not just in the ETN case, but just in general, now that the transfer portal is open and so many people are jumping ship, for greener pastures, whether that's more playing time or championship or whatever else, how the NFL will view that when draft time comes around. And we really, we're just getting into kind of that moment.
Yeah, it probably makes their, evaluations even tougher because they now have to talk with like 17 other people because the portal is
reason. Sometimes there's really valid reasons, right? And then sometimes it's, you think you belong on the field and the coach doesn't think you work hard enough to be there. And then you're trying to look at both perspectives and see who is right in those situations. It makes the NFL's evaluation process so much more difficult.
Yeah, and it's just going to continue on. Like it's not. I don't think we ever put the lid back on the barrel, or however you want to look at it. Like the portal is here, and it is going to be just part of what we do. Sure. I mean, this better than I do, but like, did Etienne leave with any, like, obviously nobody likes it when you go to a rival, but like he wasn't like, there wasn't like really bad blood there, or is it kind of like, we don't love what you're doing?
His teammates, still keep in contact with them, or at least that's what they have said. I don't think there's any massive blood. I don't know what kind of conversations took place with Napier, when he left or not. I know his mom has made some comments about like, well, you didn't want him to be RB1 and, things like that, which I don't think helps the situation when families kind of interject. But I don't know. It'll be interesting. The leaving for the rival thing, and part of me blames Napier for that, right? I think if you don't do a good job instilling that hatred of your rivals in your players, that's on you, boo. Because I can't imagine Eric transferring to Georgia or Florida State. The hate that Urban Meyer and Ron Zook instilled in them for those programs, that like, zero chance. Now, that doesn't mean if he needed to transfer that he wouldn't have, but it sure as hell would never have been to a rival. So the fact that like that wasn't even a thought in his mind, that was totally fine, is wild to me. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just old school.
Yeah, I mean, probably a little bit of it, and so am I. Like we feel the same way, and we text during games, and
Yeah,
and we don't like each other the whole week of Thanksgiving and stuff. But like
totally.
most people,
I
I
liked you this
think that's
week.
just
We were going to beat you.
I just think that that's different in today's game. I
Yeah,
don't think that it's gonna be harder and harder and harder, especially as more money comes in. You think
yeah.
about NFL rivalries, like there's a couple, right? And they're old school, but like
But
NFL
we're
rivalries
better than
are,
the NFL. That's
yeah.
why we love college
But
football, right? Like,
as we get closer to that model,
no,
and as money,
that model.
I don't think these kids are going to care about the rivalries the same way. Now, I still think they're going to want to win, and it is going to be like we grew up playing those kids, and when Florida and Miami play, there's still a lot of kids that play each other. And you're still going to want to win for those reasons, but like a lot of these times, I don't think kids are growing up with that hatred of,
Yeah.
and kids aren't always committing to schools because they love the colors or they love, I mean, there's a lot of money involved and there's coaches are in and out every 3 years. And so I don't know. I don't think that long-term passion, if you went to Florida State or Florida and Bobby Bowden and Steve Spurrier were there for decades, like you knew that history and you wanted to protect them and you grew up watching these teams. Now, I mean, you got coaches every few years, like kids don't even remember that kind of stuff. And so I don't know. I don't think it's the same now. And Etienne's really probably just the first in a long line of what we'll probably see. I can't wait for the first like Duke Carolina. Maybe it won't happen because all these kids are one and dones. But I can't wait for like the first Duke Carolina transfer to flip over in basketball and that just kind of be our new normal.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to see that at all. Well,
let me ask you this too on the back on the SEC championship game real quick. Georgia has been so up and down at times this year, and then Texas. Texas's resume there, we'll talk about the playoff here in a minute, but some of the talking points coming out of the SEC championship game were just that, the game was somewhat underwhelming. And obviously it was still exciting because it went to overtime, but and maybe this plays into what we'll talk about in a minute, but to me, neither one of the teams felt super dominant in it.
yeah.
And it just didn't feel like it didn't. And maybe this is me being the homer, or I'm sorry, the hater, and you can kind of balance this out a little bit, but it didn't feel like the over encompassing, like this game is for the national championship, like the SEC championship usually feels like, right? Like this game, the winner of this is probably going to go. It just didn't feel like that. These teams don't feel like they're that caliber. And I know the SEC has cannibalized itself a little bit this year, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it doesn't feel like that team really exists in the SEC this year. To me, maybe you feel differently.
I don't know. Well, I do. I do think the SEC cannibalizes each other, and I think we were probably watching. There's a great chance we were watching the two best teams in college football. But I think there's so much parity across college football this year, different than maybe we've ever seen it. Right. And so I think that's some of what you're seeing. But, you watch that game, and then I watched the conference games that happened later in the night. I watched the conference game that happened earlier in the day. And there wasn't anybody I watched that I felt like was better than those two teams. I just think those two teams are very evenly matched.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Oregon, offensively looked,
Yeah, but
pretty
they don't
well.
play defense. So, I mean, they're going to run up.
We don't have
That
time.
many points to
We
Penn State.
We don't have time for defense in 2024. We've left that in
This
earlier.
conference disagrees.
I do think when we talk about the playoffs here in a few minutes, it'll be interesting, and then when we get to the playoffs to see how some of these teams do match up. So,
You see Kirby's comments after the game?
yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was great. I'm here for the shade. I'm here for the petty. Now,
But he's wrong, first of all. So, and for those of you sitting at home, if you didn't, keep your TV on during the trophy presentation or whatever, but Kirby essentially was asked by Laura Rutledge, what does this bye mean to your team? Because when you secure the SEC championship win, you are going to end up with a bye in the playoffs. And he said, essentially that they got the rest that they didn't get because Greg, and he's referring to Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, Greg and his people kept sending us on the road is essentially, what he's saying, implying that their schedule was so much harder, was set up in a more challenging way than maybe everybody else. But that's ridiculous. I'd have to pull the numbers, but something like they've played the last 6 games, I want to say, either at a home or a neutral site game. And then obviously this one is played in Atlanta, which might as well be a home game for Georgia, particularly if your opponent is Texas, who's got to travel quite some ways. And he's standing 3 feet from the commissioner as he's saying it too.
Who was staring off, absolutely steaming at the fact that he was saying this. I mean, to be somewhat fair to Kirby, right? And, he's a master manipulator with convincing his kids that they're underdogs when they're the most talented team
all the time. They're like,
they did play on the road at Bama, on the road at Texas, and on the road at Ole Miss. And then obviously their rivalry game every year.
But the joke for the last decade has been that Georgia never gets any hard.
Absolutely. They never play. I agree with that. And their schedule is always trash. But he was right about this year. Like, they had their 3 toughest games on the road.
And next year
they get them all at home.
Toughest games at home.
But I thought it was. But I liked I liked him giving him a hard time.
TJ, it does not surprise me that you are here for the petty. I feel like
But you weren't. Like, you didn't think that was a little bit petty, like fun. I thought that was a good little. I didn't think it was like super down or anything.
Dog in this fight, but I just please, world's smallest violin is playing for you. Oh, guys, if you are watching with us live right now or you're watching the replay later on, please make sure that you are subscribed to A Peek Inside SEC Football. We want to get those numbers up, as many subscribers as fast as possible. We're going to have a lot of content coming your way in the coming weeks. Really, really excited about this channel. Really excited to dive into some of these SEC programs.